Good morning, Dr. Putterman. I throw it to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Maybe I'm no slouch, but I should have known better than to accept an invitation to talk after Charlie Harari. So that was not, he's such a spellbinding speaker, he's amazing. And I'm honored to be in a panel with Professor Morin and with Charlie Harari. Let me start just a few words with my personal connection to Shaare Zedek. So just this week, my niece, Dr. Liora Gottesdiener, was accepted as a pediatric resident to Shaare Zedek. It's a very competitive residency, and we family just celebrated for this really excellent news.
Awesome.
Back when I was much younger, I was actually a military physician in Sahel, and I spent the week doing military medicine, which is very different from the type of medicine that I trained on, right? And I felt a need to be connected back to academic medicine and to excellent medical care. So I spent quite a few weekends doing on-call duty in the Shaare Zedek internal medicine ward as a military physician. And I remember that time very fondly. And in fact, the people that I train with are still in Shaare Zedek, and they've become leaders of this really wonderful institution. Although I trained in medicine in a different institution in Jerusalem, I must say that everybody always knew of the outstanding medical care that one receives in Shaare Zedek. And as we heard before, it's really medical care with a heart. Finally, growing up in medical school, I had a close friend. She was also my medical mentor. Her daughter, Dr. Orit Barchad, is an infectious medicine specialist in Shaare Zedek. And she told me a little bit of the behind the scenes that we also heard from Professor Morin, the really incredibly excellent, marvelous response of Shaare Zedek to this epidemic. So I'm really honored to be here with you today. Some of you by this time might be thinking, why is an immunologist invited to talk about COVID? COVID is an infectious disease. Corona is an infectious disease. What do I know about COVID and the New York response, the US response to COVID? So many of you might have heard that really a lot of the problems that patients with Corona have is not the infectious part. The infection is of course part of the disease, but really the cause for the complication, and God forbid some of the mortality that is seen as this disease, is the immune response. So the job of the immune system is to contain the virus, but there's a very fine balance. If the immune system gets hyper-activated, the response to the virus might be effective, but then it goes to affect the patient's organs, and we have what is called, and you've heard, the cytokine storm. You've also heard about this inflammatory disease that children that have recovered apparently from COVID develop. So all of this is the secrets for why is this happening in the immune system, and immunologists are very, very closely and intensely related to what's happening on the COVID scene. So that's why I am speaking with you today. Sharon asked me when she asked me to speak, what would I like to speak about, and would I be preparing slides? And I thought that the right way to spend the next couple of minutes was actually address your questions. And we invited questions ahead of time. And I must say I was really very, very impressed from the level of the questions, very, very intelligent questions, very difficult questions. I would love to say that I know the answer to everything that was asked of me. So I'm going to try and answer the easier ones perhaps, and leave the difficult ones to a different time. That was said as a joke. I'll tackle some of the really important questions that the audience asked. I will also leave some time for questions. So if people have issues that were not addressed in the few minutes I have to speak, I'm happy to get to those. And I'm sure you could also reach out to me afterwards if I could help you in any personal matter. So here are some of the questions that we're going to cover. The first question concerns COVID antibody testing. And the question is, which antibody test is best? Should everyone have one? And can we use them to reopen work and school? Like I said, these are excellent questions, and I would love to be able to tell you that we have all the answers. As Charlie said, you know, the head of the hospital, one of the better hospitals in the world, says he doesn't know, so I'm in good company. But at least we have some insights as physicians that are taking care of these patients and that are understanding the characteristics of these tests. So the antibody test that there's no head-to-head comparison, but there are tests which are in common usage. I don't want to, you know, promote a specific company. I do know that Abbott is, the Abbott test is quite popular. I think that LabCorp and Quest are using tests which are FDA approved. And I think if you're doing, going to sort of the major laboratory operation, you can't be going wrong. But there's no best, there's no perfect antibody test. A perfect antibody test is one that would identify 100% of those patients that had the disease and would not have a false positive, meaning if the antibody test is positive, that absolutely means that you had corona. Unfortunately, the performance of these tests are sufficient for clinical use. And you will all know that the process was extraordinarily accelerated, but there's no perfect test. In fact, there's no perfect diagnostic test for many of the other conditions that we have that are not listed to corona. Every test has its own balance between what we call sensitivity, how many cases will it catch, and its specificity. Will the answer that we get will indeed be indicative of the clinical state? So it does give us a good idea. It doesn't give us a perfect answer. Should everyone have one? To my view, the answer is yes. Can everybody have one? The answer is, at this point, no, even though there are many sectors that are starting to offer antibody testing, for example, healthcare workers. And not only because I'm a physician and my wife is an anesthesiologist, but also because these are people that are on the front lines that are exposed to patients. Physicians are a great group to start with because perhaps those people that have had the disease are those that should be most exposed to the patient because they are now protected. Similarly, we could use the answers to these tests to see whether it's safe, at least safer, to open work and schools. So that was the antibody testing question. Update on vaccines, where trials being done. They're being done all over. They're being done in the US, they're being done in Israel, they're being done in Europe. You might have heard that now in the running are tens of companies. 7 to 8 companies seem to be in the more advanced stages of testing. One that got a lot of press this week was the Moderna virus vaccine. Again, I have no conflict of interest, but it does seem that at least the titer of the antibodies that is being achieved from this vaccine, meaning the amount of antibodies that your immune system will generate from being administered this particular vaccine, is parallel to the amount of antibodies that is associated with patients that have recovered. But we don't yet know that for sure. We're only in the phase 1, and we know nothing about antibody safety, which of course is always a concern. and definitely is a concern with vaccine. How soon can we expect one? It takes years to develop a vaccine. On the other hand, the world response to the corona crisis has been basically unprecedented from the point of view of the number of patients, scientists that are involved in this, clinical trials, the amount of money that's being invested. The entire process is absolutely on steroids, really, really very zooming along, if we could call it that. And I think it's reasonable to expect that 18 months to 2 years. That is my expectation, at least based upon what we know today. Are there any new medications coming out? Clearly, if there's no vaccine or the next vaccine we have that will be approved will take 1.5 to 2 years, we need something to treat the virus in the meantime. There's been, again, this audience has been following the news very carefully, and all of us have been very excited about hydroxychloroquine. All of us were very excited about azithromycin. These medications, by now we know, do not have sufficient scientific evidence to back them. And in fact, the only medication which the National Institute of Health recommends is remdesivir, and only for patients that are hypoxic, that have low levels, that are very sick, have severe COVID, and they have lung involvement. As for antibodies, you hear about these. In fact, my wife, Dr. Putterman, the other Dr. Putterman, was involved in checking patients to see which patients have high titers of antibody, to isolate these antibodies and to administer it therapeutically. It's now in clinical trials. We do not have evidence yet that such treatment is sufficient. That is the only medication that currently the NIH and its panel of experts is willing to stand behind. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions that I will address. How do we protect our children? Should they go to camp this summer? So I believe if what my wife told me is true, that my daughter's on the call as well. She's 18. She's a counselor in Mosheva. She just graduated 12th grade, and she's sitting at the edge of her seat to hear from me, her father, whether she can go to camp this year, because basically she sort of goes through the entire year just to reach the summer and see the wonderful summer camp that we arrange for our children. So should they or can they go to camp this summer? There's not going to be a blanket answer. If we extrapolate from the improvement that we see in New York, which is particularly hard hit, it does seem that it is reasonable towards the end of June, beginning of July, that camps can open. Will it be like the camps that we are used to? I don't think so. It will be camps with social distancing, perhaps with capsules, with groups of children that don't mix with each other, with counselors that won't be able to go out to Walmart in the evening, so will have to stay stuck to camp. And maybe my wife and I will not have to drive a couple of hours to visiting day because they won't allow visiting day. So again, this is more my personal expectation rather than a decision. I think that there probably will be summer camps. Our kids won't all be home with us throughout the summer, but camp this year in 2020 will be very different than what we're used to. Last question before I'll take some of yours from the audience. I think this is a very important question. Do you know the incidences of people having been reinfected? This is really a critical immunological question, right? We are saying, let's measure your antibodies. If you have antibodies, that means you were exposed to the virus. And if you're exposed to the virus, you are now immune. That, as far as we know, is true. The answer is not absolute 100%, but that is the current scientific belief. in the infectious disease and in the immunology community. We do think that infection, clinical infection, does provide protection. How long will that protection last? We're not sure. If we extrapolate from other viral infections, we think it's going to be several years. But of course, the immune response of young children or old adults is not going to be the same as those younger and middle-aged adults. So the fact that you were exposed to the virus, and even if you have antibodies, will not provide 100% insurance. So those are some of the interesting and difficult questions that we received earlier from the audience. And maybe I should stop here and see if there are any questions that Rachel and Sharon want to send my way.
Sharon.